This motherfucker don't miss.
No, he's fucking good.
That motherfucker don't miss, man.
He's good.
What is going on? Welcome back. Today, I have a very special guest. Red Pill Physique is the Instagram handle. James, all the way from Sydney, he's joining us. Like a little intro about like how I came to message you and like we ended up with this conversation is I'm always looking at people and what they're doing and different ways of looking at things that are not dogmatic. And in fact, I was looking at my first message to you. I don't remember what you posted, but I said, I would love to have a conversation because most people get caught up in like their teams and how everyone is so dogmatic and this is how it's supposed to be, and they miss the forest for the trees. And I think that's literally what you responded to me with, like, and I was like, yeah. So I think with all these things going on in the world, people focus on the negative and they forget there's so many wonderful, really good coaches out there and we have access to them. So I always try to share with my people, like, hey, here's more strength coaches, really awesome people that you can learn from as well. So that's why James is here. Why don't you give us a little background? I'm interested in knowing the origin story. How did you get into this? Give me the details.
Cool, man. Well, firstly, thanks for having me on. It's cool. This is my first proper in-depth conversation that I've had
Nice.
about the brand and about my training philosophy. So, basically, man, I started training in 2009. And, that's when social media was starting to really blossom. We had Mike Chang's six-pack shortcuts really
Yep.
take the spotlight. And that was the first program I jumped on. And I saw incredible newbie gains. And I really appreciated what he did for the industry. And then after him, I kind of did some program hopping. But as you know, once you break out of that beginner novice phase and you get to that intermediate phase of strength training, like the results, the progress just stalls, and you got to get more creative and understand basic exercise science in order to make programs. But that's not what I did back then. I instead program hopped. I went from one program to the next, trying to find that magic sauce, that magic recipe, but nothing was clicking. I might have taken like one step forward, but then, I'd take two steps back. And that was actually 7 years of being plateaued. I even tried Rich Piana's 7-hour arm workout in an attempt to like get out of this, stubborn plateau. And then it was about at around 2019, I started to understand strength training a little bit better, but I didn't study it. I was just learning off some fitness guys. And yeah, I started to combine a little bit of calisthenics around 2018, 2019, before COVID. COVID was when a lot of people jumped onto calisthenics, but I became like, because with social media, it started to become saturated with, as you know, like people on steroids and all of that weren't really being called out back then. Now we've got guys like Derek from More Plates, More Dates, and TRTs being spoken about openly now. Back then, it was like photoshopped. It was steroids, and this created a lot of like. I was like, man, this is just not it. I was like, this is just not realistic. And I started to kind of pull away from that, unfollow a lot of those guys. Now we're seeing like all the health consequences come out. More info's coming out by the day. But then I started looking at also old school lifters. So we've got like the bronze era guys. And I think it was just before the silver era guys where steroids came into the mix. But I love those guys' physiques. Like they didn't have like huge chests, which Arnold and powerlifting kind of popularized in, from the 50s to the 70s. Well, Arnold was more 70s and 80s. But I loved their proportions. The bronze era guys, they had these big traps, these big upper backs, these boulder shoulders. They just looked really crisp and dense. And they had these strong forearms. They were doing calisthenics, old school lifting, and a bunch of, a bit of Olympic lifting. And that's when I kind of thought, hey, I need to be doing a little bit something different. Go back to the roots. Don't get too caught up in this modern day hype. And that's when I actually started coming across programs by Alex Leonidas. I'm not sure if you know him, but huge shout out to him because he inspired a lot of my training. He actually brought to the mainstream neck training, the yoke training, like the weighted stretch, pulls done with momentum, a bit of arm wrestling as well. And before him, it was actually Mike the Machine Bruce, who I'm friends with on social media. He was friends with old time. He was a strongman, Bud Jeffries, who's recently passed away. Rest in peace to him. And Mike, I believe, Mike Bruce was, I believe, the first person to bring in neck training into commercial gyms from mixed martial art gyms. And now we're starting to see all the studies on that. Every pound of strength you increase on the neck, you reduce the chance of concussions by 5%, all this good stuff. And so basically after that, I think this was about 2019, 2020, I started observing more physiques from different lifting sports. So or gymnasts, especially the ones on the rings, well, the rings, arm wrestlers, strongmen, Olympic lifters, weighted calisthenics guys. Like street lifting wasn't a big thing a few years ago. Now it's starting to get big. And even rock climbers. And I'm like, man, they've all got these specific looking physiques. Like Olympic lifters and strongmen have these big traps, big upper backs, big shoulders. Ring gymnasts have these big biceps, barely do any bicep curls. Arm wrestlers have these savage looking arms, I like to say, with these hands that look like claws, these Popeye forearms, and just these different looking arms. And they've actually got strong arms. They're not just doing elbow flexion and chasing a pump. They're actually like strong in a variety of different positions, which trains the arm in different ways. So I thought to myself, can I actually train all of these styles, these modalities at once and progress on all of them? And I was actually inspired by Alex Leonidas's influence by Westside Barbell and how they use the conjugate method and how Alex uses concurrent periodization. And I thought, you know what, this might work, combining all these lifts together in a concurrent style. And the thing is, some people say you can't be a jack of all trades. And while there's truth to that, there's more nuance and context matters, because these exercises from these sports, they actually carry over to one another, some to a larger degree, some to a lesser degree. But for example, like a guy who can do planche push-ups, he's probably going to have a strong bench press, but vice versa, it's not guaranteed. A guy who's like got a strong weighted pull up, he can probably do the full stack on the lat pull downs, no issues, but the other way around, probably not. So these movements that I'm doing, they're higher skilled movements. And so they transfer better to bodybuilding than the other way around. And here I am, man. 4 years later, I've been, 4 years I've been training this way. And I've got my own strength targets for all these different movements in these different lifting sports. And I'd say I'm about 80% there. And it's been a lot of trial and error trying to figure it out. But yeah, I'm making progress.
And yeah, so if you're not following James, first go check out his page, Red Pill Physique. Dude, you're fucking jacked. Like, and there's a lot. That's what I'm saying. There's so many similarities between, like good strength coaches. And I always thought myself, I was like, the big pec thing doesn't look the most aesthetic, the most like I love that word you use, savage. It doesn't look savage. That looks there's something off about it. And just like you, I mean, I'm a huge into observe. Oh, this is like there are certain athletes that in different sports, like you're saying, they like the forearms in arm wrestling or the biceps on gymnasts, the traps and just the neck and the upper back of our strongmen. So to me, I was like, why not take what's good? Because part of the thing with social media, and especially today, it's been true for a long time, but especially today, people make content for the sake of making content, And so that forces people to just talk about stuff that is not either it's not either required or the truth about developing a physique, or they want their team, right? Our way is the right way. This is, and so people are making content, and so the average person, and I include myself in the average person because that's where I came from. It gets more and more confusing. So, and I love, and then that led me down a rabbit hole. I was like, what is this big pec thing? Because, like you said, all the old time strongmen and before, those bodybuilding shows really started to become popular, nobody had these big pillow
Oh, man.
chest. It was
Yeah.
shoulders, trap, neck, and it looks so tricep and forearm. It looks so much more, athletic and masculine. And one of the things, I don't know if you know this, but you might be familiar with the story. But Joe Weider had this weird fetish with men having like breast type pecs. So
Yeah,
that's
I
why
didn't know that.
yeah, so that's why one of the criteria for those early bodybuilding shows was development of the pecs. And we don't realize where all of this influence comes from, but you place a huge emphasis on traps, neck, and
Mhm.
shoulders.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, like you said, that produces a far more impressive physique than trying to focus on typical stuff, biceps, bench press. But that's what people know. That's what we're
Mhm.
mainstream is familiar with.
Yeah, I actually think that we've been able to get away with emphasizing chest and buys for so long since Arnold. And because steroids are so rampant, they actually make your traps look a bit bigger and your neck. And then so like people can kind of get away with that being on steroids. It kind of like it doesn't make it look too out of proportion. But if you're not on steroids, or if you don't have,
Right.
if you're not a genetic outlier with your traps, then just focusing on chest and butt, you could be in a t-shirt and it looks like you don't even lift.
Give me a little. So when what? So obviously, like you got great physique, super jacked. So what do you remember? What caused you to want to be like, all right, I want to get jacked? Like, where did that come from? Um, like because for me, it was like I was watching action movies way back in the day. I remember the first movie that I watched when I was like 4 or 5, and I was like, oh, I would need to be jacked, even though I didn't look, for majority of my life I was skinny fat, and but that was like kind of the seed that was planted. What was that for you?
I haven't thought about this in a while. For me, it was probably when I was in high school and I was playing a bit of rugby, which is like kind of like football here in America.
Yeah.
That's the closest, similar. And I was also playing basketball and I was a late bloomer and I already had a young looking face. So I would actually get bullied a lot because I was almost like a skinny fat. Believe it or not, I didn't have outlier genetics, muscle building genetics. I wasn't super athletic. And then on top of that, I was a late bloomer and I looked young in the face. Like, but I'm playing basketball with the seniors at a top level. And, I remember in one game, there was a guy who looked at me and he's like, how old are you? Like just before, you know, uh, we inbound the ball. And I'm like 16. He's like, dude, you look like you're like 9 years old. And people used to say that you look like a 12 year and that played on me a little bit, or they called me cute or whatever. So I think that was, if I'm being honest, that was a driving factor. And I was like, man, as a girl, that's a good thing. You want to be cute and you want to look young, right? But as a dude, it
That's not what
destroys
you
you. It
hear.
destroys
Yeah.
you. So naturally just like started hitting the weights and I started pushing hard. And then I like developed this reputation of being like a really hard worker. I just trained like a madman. I'm a bit smarter now. I still have a bit of that, but that was the main thing. So it wasn't like an action figure that I saw when I was really young. I actually really only started thinking about weights when I was maybe 16 years old. And then
Yeah.
I actually only started at around 19. So 18, 19. And and then now people call me scary. So
Yeah.
it's
And now,
not
now
cute
people tell you,
anymore.
oh, it's your genetics. Oh, it's your genetics.
Yeah, yeah. At first, that kind of frustrated me, because I actually study like those who have good genetics and those who don't, and some people who have good intentions, they're like, yeah, you got good genetics like me, man. Like, so, and it's like, nah, you never saw me before I started training. Like, and you know what, man, that's actually a blessing in disguise. And the reason why is because it encouraged me to get smarter and think outside the box. And that's why I have this training philosophy today. If I had blessed genetics and I just grew from looking at the weights, I wouldn't come up with all this stuff. There would be no incentive to. And that's what I guess like there was some hesitation even becoming a fitness coach and a trainer because I thought to myself, I don't have those outlier genetics. I'm not going to stand crazy and be one of those like gifted, jacked guys on Instagram that everyone else sees. But I thought to myself, if people can see my journey from where I started out to where I am now, they're going to look at that and go, I'd rather go with him.
I
Like,
can do
because
that.
yeah, I can do that too. It's that relatability. And that's why I've been fortunate enough being an in-person trainer at my gym. Some of my clients, most of them are actually the fittest clients out of most of the trainers. Like that, some trainers specialize in like beginners, again, like my demographic, which is plateaued intermediates, showing them different stuff. They've already got like a bodybuilding background, but showing them different stuff, getting them stronger and doing more creative programming. But I take pride in that because these guys, they look at me and they go, all right, I can get close to that or to that without much within realistic frames, you know?
That's such a good point. And similarly, I'm like, growing up, I remember one of the first guys I saw on YouTube, again, rest in peace, was Greg Plitt. You familiar with Greg Plitt? And I remember watching his YouTube videos. I was like, and this is a scrawny, I don't know, 14, 15-year-old Indian kid. And I just want to be jacked because I wanted girls to like me, obviously. And I would watch his stuff and I'm like, hey, there's no way I can do any of this stuff. He was just insane. And when I would go try, it just like it wasn't the right ladder of progression for me. Somebody who's naturally gifted, and that's I think you make a great point. We have a deeper understanding because we didn't have any advantages physically. So if we did, like we wouldn't need to find out, well, what actually causes when you're naturally gifted, you don't need to understand it deeply. That's not, I don't want to say that's the case for everybody, but for some of the best transformation, most athletically gifted people, they didn't have it naturally. They had to figure it out. And it makes it
Right.
relatable to the average person. And so how old are you, by the way?
Man, I'm 32.
Oh, so we're close, and that's how it was. I remember you were talking about the 7 hour arm workout, dude. I remember reading it. I think it was like a muscle and fit 24-hour add 1 inch to your biceps workout,
Wow.
and I was in there for maybe I don't know. I probably gave up at like 7 or 8. I can't do that.
Wow. And that's quite a while. 7, 8 hours. Well done. Jeez. I
But
only
hey,
lasted like 3 with Rich
dude,
Piano.
it was built in. It was like you do an hour of this, and then you go eat, and then you do this. And I was like, at that point, you
Right.
maybe this will work, and so you try it. But
Mhm.
no, that's super cool. Did you? This is a silly question. I'm assuming the answer is yes. Probably very familiar with Ziz. Yeah,
Absolutely.
inspiration to many. I think he would have
It's
thrived.
crazy. It's crazy how he's from, Sydney, western suburbs, and he just had such a huge impact across the world. It's crazy to see.
And across time, like 2024, it's still people are talking about Ziz.
Yep.
I want to get into a little bit more on your on the Instagram tag. Where did that kind of come from? Red pill physique. How did that come about? Like the name, yeah. Obviously, the philosophy all makes sense. As you're telling me, anybody
Yeah.
who isn't familiar with red pill, it's from the Matrix, and it's about you take the red pill if you want to find out what the truth of reality is. So, how did that kind of come about? It's a great name, by the way.
And I find it kind of polarized. I've had friends say, "Oh, this is not a good idea," and then I've had other guys say, "Like, man, this name goes hard. Like, this is sick." Polarizing because it is. prevalent in other contexts as well, such as politics, female nature, those sort of topics. But the reason why I thought it was a good name is because, again, it's a Matrix reference. And the whole idea behind it is that if you look at most things in life, whether it's relationships, whether it's finances, different aspects of society, you'll find that there's a majority that actually don't question their reality or question what they've been fed or what they've been taught. And so the idea behind this page was, or that name was that it's to question what you know as the truth. And I'd say basically if tying that into the fitness context, into the fitness industry, like I said before, so many people would look at these guys who have the biggest following. So guys who, juiced up, they have a lot of steroids in them, they've got outlier genetics, and people look at them as their idols and they do what they're teaching and they copy them thinking that they're going to look like them or be like them. And it's just not the case. And that's kind of what I call blue pill lifters. And so the red pill was like, let's figure out what the truth of building a physique that stands out really is, or at least get as close to that as possible. And yeah, that's basically it.
Well, I think it's great because, I try to get that message across of like, you are where you at right now because of your perception of reality or what you think is the truth. But I just have example after example. I use myself as the first example. I'm like, there was no, especially at that time, there was no 5'11" Indian guys ducking. It didn't exist. For whatever reason, I became obsessed. That's another similarity. We played basketball, so basketball was my life, and I got obsessed with dunking. And eventually, I figured out what's the formula. Why, and I've been dunking ever since. Now it's another level of like, well, people say, well, wait till you get older, and I'm like, well, I continue to get more bouncy. It's not the truth that you need to deteriorate. That's what culture and society and experts will say, and so thus everybody believes it. But if you want the truth,
Right.
you
Right.
look at the other examples and you're like, well, maybe this is not the truth.
Mhm.
I think that it's such a good name and just representation of like the thought process and the philosophy.
Thank you. And yeah,
Go ahead.
what I wanted to add to that, which I forgot, is that in my lifting journey, there's been so many times where I think like I found the secret sauce, I found what works, and I found this is it. This is the thing that most people don't know about. And then I find out, I look back and I'm like, man, I was wrong. I was dead wrong about that. And there's more context and nuance to certain things. And so what the red pill means is that I'm just constantly red pilling myself. So I'm like learning, and a lot of people don't want to do that because the red pill kind of represents like an identity shift. You're creating like, because what you thought was your reality before isn't. And so that's what the name also means, red pill physique, being open to being wrong and getting closer to the truth and getting just wiser and smarter.
And that fucking love that because I'm like it exactly the same. Everything you just said is like a reason where someone like you or someone like me can get to these things that we're able to do now that seem like not possible for most people. The only reason that these are possible is because we stayed open and receptive to a different answer. And so that's why, like, I see a lot. We see a lot of fitness pages, and that's why, like, I'll reach out to somebody like you because I'm like, oh, okay, this guy gets it. Like, I can learn something from this guy. There's tons of stuff I've taken from your page.
Thank you.
Implement, yeah, man. The only way, like, you're right. You got to constantly red pill yourself if you want to find out. Like, I'm love the Gen Pop, people, but when they're just stuck with like, oh, what's wrong? And I just need to lose 20 pounds. they're not most likely not going to get there because they're not interested in, well, I really want to find out what can I create? What can I do? That can't happen without that questioning and that, staying open and receptive to different things. Speaking of clients, you are some of the maybe an example or two that kind of personify or exemplify this approach that kind of stands out to you.
As in like the clients that embody my training philosophy.
Yeah, like just examples of people finding out, like, and the changes that are possible, because I always like to share examples of what is so I have an 86-year-old surgeon. He's a client, he's a surgeon. I never lifted weights before he came to me, and within the first month he deadlifted 225, and people's minds are blown. And you and I know the tissues all respond if you give it the right stuff. That's an
Yeah.
example that always sticks out to me because, or another lady, she's 64, she lost 60 pounds and she's looking like she looks good.
Yeah.
And as most women are so stuck on, oh, well, menopause and this and that. And I'm like, yeah, there might
Yeah.
be truth in that. Why not find out? Because it's
Right.
possible.
Right. Cool.
Stand out.
For sure. I mean, I've got one main client who's consistent with me over the span of like almost 2 years now, which is why he's gotten the results as well. Like these take time, especially when you're an intermediate lifter where the gains are a lot slower. His physique has transformed, man. Like he went, he had the typical lifter's physique. He had good pecs, good arms, but nothing up here. And, now I'm just like, when I'm walking behind him, I see him through a shirt. I was just like, his upper back looks almost like bigger than mine. And I've done that with another client as well. A few guys that have been consistent with me, like just I'm kind of jealous because I have to develop my pecs and arms as like my weak point, but some guys come to me already with like genetically good pecs and arms, and so you just got to like sprinkle this on top, and they just look like a savage, as we say, right? And then also a few other examples is like with girls, like my target demographic is guys, but I have a few girls as well, and some of them are like scared of like getting bulky. You've heard it all before, right? Like it's like here we are struggling for like decades. But I find that with the girls, with the guys, but mainly the girls, I just get their upper backs like super jacked. I know it's my speciality, but seeing that, they just look so much better, and it really gives them that gets the proportions right and gives them that hourglass shape even
Yeah.
further. So that's what I've seen. Like what I preach, and if my clients consist with me, I've seen, and I've also seen that they just enjoy the different styles of training. Like it's just more fun, versus doing just chasing a pump and doing the basic stuff, and that's a huge indicator of success. Your adherence to the gym. Are you enjoying your training or not?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I find that frequently as well. I'm like, a lot of people who come to me, even though they might not be in shape or they don't look very, they do have most people, and I like most of my clients, I'm like, you guys have better genetics than me. Like, you just got to do the stuff. Like, I promise you, you will be able to make some drastic changes. But
That's what I say as well.
yeah, but that piece, I think that's super important is, but you got to be consistent. It takes time to change tissues visually. Strength gains can happen pretty quick. Tendon and ligament gains happen, a little bit slower, but those visual changes, they take a little bit of time. So that consistency is so important. And I'm glad you brought up the fun part of it too, is like, I mean, I've always kind of focused on doing a few different things, but I was like, you need to get strong, and the basics are really good, squat, overhead press, deadlift. And however, you can keep yourself, you know, having a good time, which will reinforce the consistency. And a lot of these other things, they're like really interesting and they cause a lot of great change. Like, we just actually hired, do you know Dak Performance?
I've seen the name. Yeah, yeah. I think I follow him. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I'm always like hiring people and like learning from people, and like the stuff that he's doing is nuts. Like, For example, all the impulse rope work, things like it's crazy. Some of the stuff like he'll step off of like a 5 foot platform and stick a landing on one leg, and just like goes to show you like what you can develop if you do, and it's really fun. So I think that's important for people to realize as well. But
Exactly.
variety, not for the sake of variety, but you have a purpose with that variety. Um, let me ask you this, like couple of like random and fun questions, but what are some of the trends that you see that are helpful for people to be looking at currently? And then as always, there's always like unhelpful trends that people get fixated on, that like you don't need to do it, like stop, like this is not going to help you close the gap that you're trying to close. So what's a trend that you think is helpful, and then one that maybe isn't as helpful?
Cool. So I've got one trend that could be helpful, that I think is helpful. I'm not sure about, I haven't thought of one that's not exactly as helpful, but the one that I think is helpful at the moment is this trend of hybrid training right now, which is kind of like what I teach, but it's only become more popular over the last year or two, and it's more the blend with cardio and weights, right? Which I think Goggins, his popularity has really helped popularize that, and a lot of people are doing marathons now and running a lot more, which is great. So I would say that's a positive. People are learning to incorporate different activities together. And I think what I've seen with social media over the last few years is that we're looking at not just training multiple modalities, but also looking at how it can transfer to more functional areas of life. So a lot of my training might carry over really well to things like grappling and a lot of different day-to-day activities in life. So people are now actually gravitating towards training, not just to look good, not just for aesthetics, but to be strong and to, have that kind of real world strength, which is, up for debate if that's a thing. I think it is. And I think that's moving in the right direction. And we see that, this whole focus on aesthetics, while we want to look good, this whole focus on aesthetics and this steroid era is kind of like falling to the wayside a bit. So it's falling back. And I think that's a positive thing for the fitness industry. A bad trend or a negative trend? Man, that's a good question. I'm trying to think. No, I can't think of one right now. If you spit out a few,
I'll throw you some examples, maybe it'll trigger something. But also did want to say, arguably, the way of training that you're talking about leads to a more aesthetic physique, in my opinion. So at the end of the day, like, everybody's always impressed with the big bodybuilder physique, but what's really eye-catching is that athletic, very capable physique. As far as unhelpful trends that I see, and I think everything can have its place, but it's a lot of cart before the horse type stuff. So recently, all this focus on looking at all these different metrics and measuring things and worrying about testosterone.
Oh yeah. Do you want to go, or let me?
No, go for it. Go for it.
Cool. You just said testosterone. So I'm going to say this is kind of controversial, but I think that the normalization of TRT is dangerous, especially with people who don't know what they're doing. I'm not a TRT specialist expert. I'm just saying I wouldn't be surprised if there's a lot of doctors out there that aren't 100% sure on whether they should prescribe it or not, and they're just going through and doing it anyway. Now, I know it's a safe hormone, testosterone, but I think like some people are using it as, to get to super physiological levels instead of like using it for what it was intended for, where you have like dangerously low levels of testosterone after you've addressed all the low hanging fruit of your lifestyle factors. I think just normalizing that, listening to like some credible health experts out there and just saying, "Oh, he said it was okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do it." They just needed that validation to go do it without knowing how it's going to impact their health, short term and long term.
That's a great point. I had it written down, but maybe we'll have to talk about it another time. But there's so much, oh, the science. Well, I think there's too much science and not enough application. And because when you do the application, you find out. And you bring up a great point. What is the like first address a low-hanging fruit? Why are you looking at testosterone? You might just be looking at it because somebody made a video about it, like, oh, you have dangerously low testosterone if XYZ, and maybe you didn't have a problem, but now you've created a problem. Well, all of the strongest people I know, none of them have ever worried or looked at their testosterone. It's all these people who aren't very strong or they're not consistent. They're already not lean. They're looking at all these things as like a shortcut.
Right. Makes sense.
Versus if you do stuff that requires testosterone and you're
Healthy
able
levels
to,
of testosterone.
why do you care what the number is if you're strong as hell, you don't get tired, you're lean? What does it matter what the testosterone number is? And just recently, I forget, I think it was Derek from More Dates. He was saying, Mosey's testosterone was 184. Look at him. Who gives a fuck what his testosterone is? He's jacked out of his mind. He can do all the stuff that he wants to do in business and health, etc. Does the number?
Yeah, he looks as though he's got plenty of energy to me already.
That's what I'm saying. And so I think that's a great one because people get they watch a Huberman podcast and they're like, oh, I need to do, and then they end up doing nothing. Versus if you would have just spent that time, get strong, get lean, be active, get your heart rate, get winded, you're going to be fine. And then after you've addressed that, sure, maybe check it out. But I'm with you on that 100%. Like, all the people on testosterone and steroids that I've ever met in person, well, let me give you, I always ask them, like, hey, you're still not very strong. You still got too much body fat. So what is the testosterone doing for you? Because I'm like, and I'll say this, especially if it's a client that I know that I'm working with, I'm like, I don't take testosterone. I'm stronger than you are. So is it really what you need, testosterone, or do you need a stimulus to the muscles that will give you what you're looking for? Because at the end of the day, you want to look good and you want to feel good and you want to be strong. So then why not do those things? Because nothing else will. And how many people take steroids and then they didn't lift properly and eat properly and they just look worse,
There's that too. Yeah.
So, all right, a couple of other questions for you. We didn't get to dive into nutrition too much.
That's all right.
Yeah, there's
That's a controversial one, but yeah.
But
it's all controversial. I love it.
Everything is controversial, man. Like Jesus Christ. But what are some of your favorite foods that are staples in your diet?
And I like to have a bit of a mixed omnivorous diet. I am a meat eater. I know some people are not going to be happy with that, and I do eat like 5+ eggs almost daily. But the thing is, I make sure that most of my food is organic. It's clean. It is more expensive, but I don't spend my money on other things that are recreational stuff. It's all for this, and yeah. So my meat is grass fed. Free range, and it tells me how many square feet the chickens are apart. They're all healthy. And then I like to have a lot of in the morning, I like to have kefir or kefir, goat kefir, I prefer actually, with, some flax seeds, some organic mixed berries. I think that's a great way to kick off the gut and the digestive system. Something light in the morning, usually higher protein, lower carb. And then towards the end of the day, I like higher carb, lower protein, as the carbs tend to make you feel more relaxed, more full, bit heavier, which is more suited for winding down, getting ready for sleep. I think it releases serotonin. And I've got my healthy blend of organic fruits and veggies as well. And so as long as I'm checking all that, we're not going into supplements. They're just like the basics that I have every day. And because I'm eating similar foods every day, I kind of just eyeball it. I don't calorie count or macro count or anything like that. I know as well, like if I'm getting extra steps, if I don't want to lose weight, I might have to bump up calories a little bit by a few hundred a day. So yeah, that's all I got for nutrition right now before we take a deeper dive later on.
That's great. Yeah. It's everybody makes everything controversial. It's not that serious. And there's a lot of ways to get the job done, provided you know what the job you're trying to do. And so, all right, last couple questions. What about
Sure, man.
what's like one of your favorite movies?
Yeah, man. I think two that really stood out to me as of late was Rush with the story about Nicky Lauda, the Formula One driver.
Okay.
That was quite a while ago. And Top Gun Maverick. I really like Top Gun Maverick. And yeah, man, I think those two, I can explain why, but those two definitely. And then if you know, I love my classics as well, Godfathers, you know, Star Wars, all that.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I've watched Maverick like 4 times, so I'm like good.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
It's so well done, that movie.
yes, amazing. What about music? Are you a music in the gym type of guy or not really?
No, big time, big time. I come from a musical family. Um, so I love like a variety of different genres. Some people are just either electro or they're rap or they're just a mixture of two. I kind of look at it as my training, right? They might just do bodybuilding and powerlifting. So they're just like hip hop and electro or, you know, heavy metal and, uh, you know, heavy rap, you know.
Yeah.
How I like to mix my training is the same way I like to mix my music. So, oh man, some days I'll listen to like movie soundtracks or classical music. Other days I'll listen to like some really deep progressive house. Some days I'll listen to like some gangster hip hop. Some
Yeah.
days I'll listen to some like what else we got, man? Some like fresh like instrumental type of tracks. So it's really diverse.
Yeah. That's the same with me. If it sounds good, I'm gonna listen to it. It doesn't really matter what genre it is. Final words for someone who's like, man, I want to, and women, men, young, old, we use the term jack, but I mean, that could mean different things for different people. But for someone who's like, I want to develop my vehicle further, and maybe they've struggled for a while, what are some like starting points that you would recommend or things to think about? Because I think it's always hard to, give your one recommendation. Like, that's a tough question, but the questions for somebody to think about guide them better into whatever that answer might be.
So in regards to training, or just
Uh,
being jacked, like
yeah, probably getting into training, but just like developing their physique overall. Yeah.
I would say learn basic exercise science so that you can prevent overuse injuries from coming or reduce the chance of overuse injuries coming up, prevent or reduce the amount of times that plateaus occur. So I was plateaued for 7 years. What a waste of time, right? And just understand the value of programming and muscle building. Give yourself a 5 year window and don't be too fixated on losing weight and getting lean. I like to say we're not over fat, we're under muscled. And if you stop thinking about, man, I just need to lose a few kilos, I'll be the first to tell you, you can do it in a few months and look great. But the real prize and the real focus is gaining muscle in the right areas, which means getting strong at the right lifts for your body weight. And that's all I'll say.
That's great. Where else? I know the Instagram is Red Pill Physique. Where else can people find you? You got anything coming up? Any new things? What's the
Yeah, I
deal?
mean, apart from Instagram, I got my TikTok, Red Bull Physique as well. And I should be launching YouTube pretty soon. So
Nice.
yeah, it's been a long time coming, but yeah, that's well overdue for me to hop on YouTube.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you for coming on. I know it took us a few tries to coordinate, but we made it. So
Man, I'm happy we did it.
we'll have to do another one some point. Talk about more controversial things. But
Absolutely. Take a deeper dive. Yeah.
yeah, man, appreciate you. Appreciate your time. And if you guys have any questions for James, you know where to find him, and I'll link it in the description as well. So thank you.
Legend. Thanks for having me, man. It's been a pleasure.